Good afternoon, I'm Emma Walden and welcome to FundForum Live and our webinar today looking at asset management in the social era. 3 years ago, CACEIS undertook a pioneering study in Europe of leading asset managers' behaviour in the social media landscape. Results were enlightening, showing that as many as 40% of managers have no presence on social media at all. Now, 3 years on, CACEIS have revisited and updated their study, and a lot has changed since 2013. Well, that full report is available here if you click on the Resources tab at the bottom of the screen. So, in 2016, and an increasingly social age, what does social media mean for asset managers and the future of the industry? Well, to explore those topics, I'm delighted to be joined today by CACEIS Deputy CEO, Joe Saliba. Joe, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Emma.
Hi. Well, just before we hear about the study from Joe, a reminder that you can send questions through to Joe during this broadcast. We will be emailing out a recording of our discussion today after the event, and you can follow the conversation on Twitter at FundForum, where you can also tweet any questions via hashtag #FFwebinar. Now, though, I can hand over to Joe Saliba, who will share CACEIS' study with us today. Joe.
Hey, thank you again, Emma. And hi, everyone. You know, a few months ago, I went visiting a client, and it's a true story. I walked into the hallway, and I saw this machine that you can see on slide 3. I'll tell you, I did this presentation before when I asked the people to raise their hands, who knows what this machine is for. Not too many people knew about it. I know anybody who's below 40 would not recognize it. It says on it, you know, this machine has been used for international trade confirmation until 2006. So I can tell you, you know, I was amazed from 2006 until today how much technology changed and where we are today. I mean, any one of you who looked at the recent, you know, publicity on social media for the iPhone 7 compared to the teletype machine, this one, which was 10 years ago, can imagine, you know, how much the leap is being too big. Also, you know, I thought I will share with you a little story just to make my point. You know, I have a small flat which I rent as furnished, and as a good baby boomer, you know, me and well in my 50s, I made sure I put a very nice wide flat screens with all the cable TVs and all the stuff, hoping that this will add value to the flat. And to my surprise, you know, when I go see the tenant from time to time, and I asked him, you know, how is he enjoying the cable and the television? He didn't even know how to turn it on. And the guy is a smart student and all this. And I said, you know, you don't watch television? He said, no. He said, you know, the flat screen is great. If you can put an Apple TV on here, I can reflect what it's on my iPad or iPhone. It would be great. But really, you know, watching television like this, it's not really of high interest. And I can tell you, one-way communication is certainly out of the window. And that's what, you know, it was a kind of wake-up call for me. If you look at slide 4, you can understand, you know, today there are almost 2 billion users on social media. I mean, there's 1.6 on Facebook, and then, you know, 400 million here and there. I'm sure there is an overlap, but that tells you, you know, social media is totally embedded in our life, and a two-way communication is totally now part of our expectations, part of our culture. So it was interesting, you know, these statistics were as of June 2016, and I'm sure they're changing every month, growing the numbers. If we flip to slide 5, you can see we also looked at the Fortune 500 to see how social media getting into the Fortune 500, and we realize it's totally embedded into the strategies of the Fortune 500. As you can see, the use of LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. You know, LinkedIn is 93% of the Fortune 500 using it. So in terms of branding, in terms of recruiting, in terms of promoting your products, in terms of even customer service or customer relation. So it is totally now part and parcel of every large corporation, the use of social media. So what happened is really in 2013, we and PwC together, we said, we should look what's happening in social media for the asset management industry. So we did our study, and we kind of used a methodology, which we said, okay, we'll pick the top 100 asset managers in terms of asset under management. We'll look at the top 20 fastest growing asset managers. And we said we're going to select this kind of sample, and then we're going to see how they use social media. And we took some criteria on how they use social media. For instance, how many tweets, how many downloads, how many users, and the level of interaction, etc., to see how it compares. Then, in 2016, and the results in 2013 were really amazing. I mean, we realized that asset management industry was really totally behind, and we noticed certain things. For example, it was only the largest one who used social media. Mostly in the US, players are using social media, and the European were still totally shy into getting into it. And essentially what we've done in 2016, we said, okay, it would be interesting to see in 3 years' time what happened. How did we evolve? And we used the exact same criteria in terms of the number of the sample, the 100 largest one and the 20 fastest one. And we took the same criteria in terms of measuring the interaction and the use of social media. And what came out was pretty interesting. First of all, we realized that the size of the asset under management and the size of the asset management company is really no more a criteria. Everybody or almost everybody is now getting into social media. In 2013, we realized when the asset manager was a kind of an affiliate of a group, a larger group, the larger group had some social media usage, but not at the affiliate level. In 2016, that changed as well. The asset managers, whether they are independent or affiliate, they were totally now getting more active in social media. And also very interesting, we realized that European asset managers are catching up very, very quickly with the US in terms of usage. For instance, in 2013, we had, for example, one in the top 10 or top 12. In 2016, we started having 4. If you look in the top 50, we had maybe 10, and more than doubled in 2016. So the trend was totally to go European asset managers totally catching up. On slide 7, we also looked at the interaction, because you can be doing social media, some kind of a one-way social media, but we wanted to see how much of them are doing the two-way interaction, the true two-way interaction. And that comes with a lot of risk, a lot of resources, which I'll talk about in a second. But in 2013, we had 60% active, which went up now to 90%. So that tells you, almost everyone is now active. But in terms of interaction, it was only 9%, which is the largest one, being interactive, and now it's getting over 20%. It's still low, but when I tell you a little bit further about the implication of interaction, you can understand that obviously the trend, it's going to continue and it's going to become more and more common practice, but you will understand why it's not going as fast as just getting into social media from almost a one-way side. So one of the things, we also realize on slide 8 is the interaction is very, very high in the robo-advisors. And obviously, because it's robo-advisors, those guys are working very, very hard to make the user feel they're interacting with a human on the other side. So the interactivity and the time to react and the way they react, it's totally feel and it's like a human being. And Facebook it's very adapted to this, so it's been commonly used by the robo-advisors. And to be frank with you guys, this is the expectation. Some people tell me it's the expectation of the millennials, meaning those young guys, I guess, born after 1990. But that's true. It is part of the DNA of my kids and your kids and the new generation. But I have to tell you, even myself and people, we're expecting more and more to have this 24-hour reactivity and a quick response to our questions. So the interaction, it's demand from almost everyone. So when we looked really how it's used, the social media, you can see on slide 9, it's really first, which was historical, is for corporate information, for product marketing and product information. But it's now increasingly used, and it was used before, but now it's becoming much more in terms of recruitment. That's why actually LinkedIn, it's becoming kind of the dominant platform used by corporation in general and in the asset management industry in particular, and also for industry education through YouTube and other tools. So having said, how much social media has now become part of our daily life, whether we're asset managers or any business to that matter, well, the regulator got interested. And some regulators got into it earlier than others. For example, the US and the UK regulators have been into it for quite a while and have provided very specific directives on how to deal with social media, because it impacts, obviously, the consumer and the investor. Some other regulators in Europe and Australia and others have also got involved, but so far they provided more broad directives, but it's all going in the same direction. It's going in the same direction in terms of 5 areas. The first one, making sure that any company who gets into social media, they have a risk management program or governance, understanding what are the risks they're taking, because there are major risks. And the reach is so wide when you go into social media, the impact could be humongous, positive or negative. Employee training, making sure that the people who are on the other side responding are trained and they know how to react, and they have a framework, and also how to watch and supervise those trained employees to make sure, they're, for whatever reason, if someone trying to kind of diverge from what needs to be done, so it's supervised. And also about the content. What kind of content we're putting there, making sure, everything is accurate, there is no false information, and so on and so forth, making sure the content is also within the guidelines, and the management have the responsibility to approve the content. And finally, making sure everything is archived in terms of social media. So all of this, as you can imagine, cannot be done easily, and it requires a lot of resources, a lot of investment, a lot of thinking, which I'll come about in a few seconds. So we did our ranking. Our ranking was how mature is an organization in the asset management industry based on all the criteria. And the ranking, you can see it on page 12. You can see the top 12. Actually, the top 4 were there in 2013, so not much change. These are the largest asset managers. But you can see here the European becoming more part of the top 10, whether Schroders or Robeco or Aberdeen or Amundi. So the European catching up. The question, if you go on slide 13, is how we measure the maturity, because, obviously we have all these criteria, but I thought it would be interesting to present it to you in terms of 3 layers. The first layer, and it's the proper way to go about it anyway, the first layer for an asset management company is to define the strategy, to define the governance, to define the plan. And believe me, there are tons of work to be done before we're ready for that. What are the products we want to promote? What kind of communication? What kind of target investors we're looking after? What kind of geographies? What are the risks we're thinking, we're taking, and so on and so forth. So once you've done that, then it's interesting, and now there are plenty of tools to listen what's happening on social media. You will find that a lot of people are talking about your company and saying things maybe you want to know about before you finalize your strategy and your governance and your communication plan. So it's interesting, before you jump into interacting and talking to people on social media, is to know what the people are saying about you as an asset manager or about your funds. So you can imagine this is an iterative. So the first level, it's the study. The second one is the capability to listen, and you can iterate. And finally, to get into interaction, to be engaged into interaction, and to be consistent into that. Because once you're into it, you can't be inconsistent, meaning one day you react, the other day you don't react. And so you have to be very careful. But if you do it properly, then you know you can, and that shows the maturity of the organization. Once you've got to the three levels, and now you're reiterating and you're circling back, you're adjusting your strategy, it shows how mature you got into it. Some of the risks, you know, that we saw talking to asset managers, obviously because of the risk involved in that in this domain, people get to over control. They want to, you know, make sure that no one word is said outside the framework. No answer is done. So you start over controlling, and that's counterproductive. When you start saying for every question, we will call you back, we're not ready, all that, then people on the other side get frustrated, and it loses the whole effect. And generally speaking, you know, people, and maybe it's getting better now, but being skeptical, is this going to pay off? Are we really going to be able to grow our market share out of social media? People get skeptical, but I can tell you it's a reality of today's life, and it's more and more embedded, and we should not be skeptical, but really adopt it and adapt to it. So the question now is, what's next for management? What's happening? Few things happened in the past where we talked about in our 2013, but some of the things that now in 2016 that's becoming more interesting is, for example, disintermediation of distribution of your funds, what we call direct distribution. And the potential here is just huge. I mean, if you can unlock this opportunity where you can have your funds accessible and being sold in a massive way, then you know you can just have a quantum leap in terms of collecting funds to your funds. Essentially, there was an example in China through the Yubao, and that was a kind of a humongous example. But obviously, in China, they don't have the same regulation and the same constraints. The major roading block for this is really all the regulation around KYC and AML, which is really stopping this progress in this area. But obviously, once we found solution, and I'm sure there are ways to find solution, we will, then you know the opportunities are huge. If you go to slide 17, sorry, you can see that data analytics and being able to see what's happening on social media and try to analyze the data there. You have a huge amount of information, very useful information that will allow you to do client profiling, to have a better targeting of your investor target, etc. So doing all this, having this in-depth knowledge of your customers and working and building programs to have more market share and more loyalty, there are huge opportunities in this domain as well. And there are many, many tools today with the fintech to allow to do this. In terms of, on page 18, it's cost savings. Social media today allows for significant amount of savings, whether, you know, in terms of product testing, R&D, getting feedback from test groups, knowing, you know, how the people feel about it. So you can do this, you know, in a very, very efficient way on social media. In terms of traveling, instead of flying all over the world to go provide stuff, you can do it like what we're doing now here on webinar. You can do advertisement, you can do promotion. And some companies are doing increasingly client servicing through social media. So huge amount of opportunities coming up. And on page 19, the thing that will become increasingly a challenge is really like what's happening in other industries, is communities are being created, and communities that will include all the stakeholders in the interested industry. In the case of asset management, that would be the investors, that would be the distributors, that would be the regulators, that would be the people in the press, that would be lots of different stakeholders. So again, the opportunities are great to be able to communicate with all these stakeholders, but one more time, the impact of what we do will be bigger on a positive or negative. So this is a kind of a quick helicopter ride on how social media and asset management. Hopefully that was interesting for you, and I'm ready to get any questions. Thank you so much.
Joe, thank you very much indeed. To begin with, really, I was just going to sort of ask you about areas you've covered there. You talk about sort of millennials expecting real-time exchanges and one-way communication being out of the window. And you talked about the sort of positive figures of the increase in use of it amongst asset management firms. And obviously you talked about some firms doing it really well. Could you give us any more feel for what firms are doing who are doing it well? You know, what does that mean? And what's the tangible effect of that, if you like?
Well, you know, doing it well is really, as described it, you know, in the methodology. It was, I think, on one of the slides where I talk about the 3 layers, where you really have to define properly your strategy and your governance, and what are the products that you want to put out there, and what are your messages. So defining this and taking the time to do it properly, it's absolutely necessary. And the second one is really to learn to listen. It's like everything in our life, not only in social media. Learn to listen and go see what people are saying. So most companies who are successful and making huge progress are those who are really spending their time properly on those 2 layers before they get to interact. Now, I have to be honest with you, the short-term benefits are not, I don't think, you know, major growth are seen, but certainly it's going in the right direction. But it's certainly, this is a trend, and more as this becomes, you know, the practice, and from an investor perspective, from everybody's perspective, I think the implication and the opportunities for the asset managers will be increasingly important.
And I guess the investment at this point is so important because obviously millennials are going to be the biggest percentage of the workforce before we know it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, it's expected that by 2020, you know, millennials will become a significant part of the target clients, of the investors. And, you know, the millennials are very conscious about environment. They're very conscious about their retirement. And asset managers should think about the type of products that are more suited for millennials, like, you know, retirement type product or green type of product, environmental friendly products, and many others. So I would suggest for asset managers to be thinking carefully about their product strategy accordingly.
So thinking carefully about product strategy and listening, which is, I guess, referring to your previous answer as well about, you know, listening to the customer, but sort of social listening is this big buzzword at the moment. There's vast amounts of hugely valuable data out there for firms to cash in on as well, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as I was, you know, it's amazing for what you can get out, the tools that are available, the fintech providing solution to enable asset managers to really understand a lot of things about why products are working in some places, not in others, what kind of profile of clients that they are interested in their products, and so on and so forth. You know, we can, and, you know, I just not to be doing an advertisement, but one of our recent product at CACEIS, because we have a huge amount of information, is to provide this information to asset managers to allow them to have better targeting for their clientele.
Yeah, and spotting trends as well, I suppose, goes along with that, doesn't it? I mean, there was obviously news out this week about the fact that Twitter were the first to spot Pokemon Go and what the effect on Nintendo would be because of that.
Oh, I mean, you know, that's where you go to. I mean, you know, I'll tell you more and more, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, people don't watch one way. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on, you know, all these platforms to find out what's happening. And when they want to get an opinion about something, they just go and just find it there. So the impact on the business, in asset management in particular, but in general, is just, it's a reality today.
One thing you did talk about, and one thing I think has been a bit of a red flag to lots of companies in the past, is the spectre of regulation and privacy issues around social media. And I guess you covered it there. You talked about how important the structure of how social media is done within these companies is so important now.
Oh, absolutely. And I can tell you the regulator, listen, we're talking about finance here. And the regulators have always been very active in the financial industry for obvious reasons, because we're touching the pocket of people. And they're now totally conscious of the impact on the financial side and in the asset management industry. And that's why some in the US, UK are much more precise about what needs to happen. And in other European countries, they're much more providing the guidelines and converging into being more specific about in terms of rules and regulations around social media. So there is a high interest from the regulator, definitely.
Indeed, a question coming in from one of our listeners, sort of saying, how do you deal with that myriad of compliance issues, if you like, given the nature of social media and how much change is happening all the time? Sort of, how do you reconcile the vast amounts of archiving that will need to be done?
Well, listen, the question is a great question, because if you think about it, you would say how this can be done. Fortunately, the technology today and the tools available are making these things more feasible than they used to be before. Otherwise, it would have been an impossible task to archive and track and see what's said here and all the interactions. But it's amazing, from a technological perspective, how much progress we've done. And the regulator is conscious about this. I mean, the regulator will not enforce something if there are no tools to be able to do it, because they will need the tools as well. So it's the technology it's making. When we talk of the millennials, I mean, of course, the DNA is different, but the technology is also affecting the DNA in some way, So, yeah. It's a two-way street, yeah.
Absolutely. Another interesting question just come in. Do you see social media as helping level the playing field to the smaller niche managers and sort of going on from that, if you like,
definitely
in the emerging markets as well?
It reminds me of a book I read a long time ago. It wasn't on the same subject, called It's a Flat Word, or The Word is Flat, by Friedman. And essentially it was, talking about how the leveling it's happening. But certainly the social media will level the field for asset managers. And small asset manager with a smart and astute social media strategy, they can get much more for the buck, and they can get more into promoting their products, definitely. I mean, it's certainly because the reach is so big now that you don't need as much resources as in the past to be able to pay all the marketing and the television and all the stuff to get to it. So there is a window. I don't know how much, this window will remain in terms, because social media making much cheaper today to do a lot of these things. I don't know if, the advertising and all the stuff will become more expensive in the future. But anyway, there is a window for small asset managers to capture as much as possible today. Maybe the word will change.
And what about the emerging markets? Because social media is very influential there. One of our listeners has sort of said, why don't we see them in the top 12, if you like?
Oh, I didn't talk about a lot of things from the emerging markets. It's not because if you look in terms of platforms, they have social media platforms I didn't mention about. I talked about the 2 billion using of Facebook and all this. In Asia and China and Japan and Russia, have a very great experience. I talked about the Yubao experience, where in China, they allowed through social media, through this interaction for investors to invest up to like 20 cents to buy into a fund.